Well, hello everyone once again, and welcome to the Bible Beyond the Basics podcast. This is episode 17. Once again, we are your hosts, Jason and Bob. I was thinking about our topic for this week. We're talking about the infamous man who touched the ark.
Oh, how dare he!
And it was making me, one of the things that made me think about was when my oldest daughter was really young. We walked into a room and there was writing all over the walls. And we called Charlotte in. We said, Charlotte, why did you draw on the walls? And at the time we only had one child. And she looked up at us and she said, did you see or did you hear? Did you see or did you hear? How did you figure out that this happened? And it came to, ultimately, she didn't understand at the time that there were ways to decipher and to understand what had happened, but she thought that she had avoided essentially touching the ark, or that nobody had seen it. But people were able to figure it out. Mm-hmm. We were able to figure it out in some way. So how did God know that the ark was touched?
Well, what is the ark? First of all, and most of us probably think of the ark in terms of Indiana Jones. Let's be blunt, folks. More people watch Indiana Jones that are reading Second Samuel chapter 6 and following. And because it's far more interesting. Although I do like the Big Bang Theory when Amy Farrafallo basically said, everything that Indiana Jones didn't change.
He's completely non-essential to the plot. Yeah.
And the ark does it, all this magic, and they put it in the warehouse, the power, the emanating. Okay, what is the ark? Again, an ark, if you go back to our days with Noah's ark, it's a box. Mm-hmm. And a box is designed to hold something. And basically, according to tradition, it holds the Ten Commandments and maybe a few other articles of the priesthood that was to be used. It represented also, it was a seat. If you look at it, and some of the pictures are pretty good in some of the Bible dictionaries, with the seraphim, cherubim, and all that sort of stuff around it, and it's gold. It's a throne. It's where God sits. Because their understanding of God... Well, frankly, their understanding of God is not unlike what my sister just told her mother and me about Eve and crossing the sidewalk in Alameda, California. And Margaret would always look up, hold hands, and the light would flash with the figure of the man saying it's okay to cross now. And so Margaret would say, we can cross now, the man saying so. Mm-hmm. And so Eve, to this day, at 2 years old, says, oh, the man in the sky says it's okay to cross the street.
Mm. And we all have these different... That's on a smaller scale, but we all have our own different worldviews and understandings from where we came from. We've all got these little ticks of what our past is like. We all have our different political views as well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we forget to understand that, like, there are, as you've been saying, like the facts in the world, the truth that exists in the world, or instead, like, we get ourselves wrapped up in our own little truths or understanding about things. We try to bring all of that in, and we get so wrapped up with our own little worldview that we try and change other things, or we try to make everything fit into this box that we've got. Mm-hmm. But not everything always fits inside that box, like everything fit in the ark.
Yeah, it's the job, the classic definition, Jason and I both know this is the classic definition of what we're, of basically preaching and Bible study is to basically to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. If we're not disturbing things, or at least trying to open up some imagination and some thinking, we're not trying to, if we're here to validate people's truths, or validate our own truth, we're missing the boat. We are a series of questioners. And we've got to open that up. That's our job, is to question, to probe, not to create messiness or doubt, but actually to lead people into a far more deeper and richer friendship, as we say, with the Bible.
Yeah, and I will often say the Bible is messy, but we don't make the Bible messy. We don't try to make it more complicated. But we also have to acknowledge that it is what it is. And, it's not just served to us on the silver platter with all of the utensils in line and a beautiful array and things like that. If we really want to read and interpret Scripture as it was written, it's messy, it's complicated, it takes work, and in some ways it's going to tear us apart and hopefully build us back up.
Well, which is basically what I could have had an appointment to West Point back in high school. The colonel wanted me to go, and I said, "Well, I really don't think a guy who does taking orders too well to be good." So a couple of my buddies actually went in, and they both came back and said, "Boy, they shave our heads. We're in our underwear. We're standing all in the auditorium. We all look alike, except for some skin tone, pre women in the military." And he said, "We're all anonymous, and they break us down, and they're going to build us up the way we want," which is exactly what some of my fundamentalist friends said at seminary.
Yeah.
Said, "What happened?" In fact, shortly after I left seminary, so one of the students got so upset with the Old Testament professor, Bernie Anderson, that he tried to sue him for heresy. Okay, all right, kid.
Yeah.
Because again, that's the job of what we're supposed to do, is to open up, not to destroy, but to build up. And so we have the story in 2 Samuel of Uzzah, poor Uzzah. Okay, and again, how superstitious are we? Step on a crack, break your mother's back.
Yeah.
I lived in Lancaster County. You cannot exit another door except the one you entered in a house, and all these little traditions.
Some communities, those superstitions are as real as the understanding of the Scripture that some of us have.
Exactly. It's just so poor Uzzah. What they're doing, the Ark of the Covenant is the representation of God's presence. It was carried about through when they weren't lost in the wilderness. They were wandering and migratory herdsmen, and they're going around solidifying themselves. And that was the focus in the tabernacle. The portable ark, because it was carried, had poles. You carried it around like a litter. And it was in the tabernacle, which itself was a tent. And when following this, in the stories, the conquest, and they're solidifying themselves as a people, and then we get a king, which is a bad move because nobody really does well with a king. Nobody wants. Give me a republic rather than self-appointed people who want to rule and tell me what to do. I like a republic with votes. I won't go there. You can read my columns. And so they're solidifying as a people, and the Ark of the Covenant is the representations of God's blessing and presence as, hey, He's our God. Now, again, remembering the best way for me to translate and understand the Hebrew understanding of Yahweh, the God that they could, Adonai, Elohim, the God they could not mention by name, is NFL franchises. Okay. So the Hebrews had their God. The Canaanites had their God. The Philistines had their God. Everybody had different gods. Sort of like, okay, if you're Pittsburgh, are you a Steelers or are you an Eagles? Okay.
Yeah.
Those are our modern versions of gods, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for me, it's the English Premier League and Manchester United. Now, the question is, who wins the Super Bowl? That's the supreme God.
Yeah.
And so that's how they understood their God. And so it represented the God's presence. And so what they're doing, David is very clever. He knows what Jerusalem represents. Jerusalem represents the region where Melchizedek taught Abraham the true God. Melchizedek and Jerusalem are identified the city of peace, which itself is a joke, and Jerusalem, and it represents that place where the God Most High was worshipped and dwelt. And David intentionally relocates the city capital, the center of Israel at that time, to Jerusalem to basically anoint himself the threefold warrior, king, and priest. Threefold in charge. And what better than to bring the portable ark and tabernacle and turn it into something permanent? It is a strategic political machination.
Sure. Yeah.
Solidifying his kingdom. Which then questions, why is he doing that and how is he doing it? It is not because God really wanted it. If God really wanted it, God would have said, okay, I don't, build me that temple, David. Later on, Solomon is going to claim that distinction.
Yeah.
No. So what we have, it's the box is full. And by the way, so what happens is they're taking it by cart and they're going over a threshing floor, sort of like a stone concrete area, where they would thresh wine. The animals would go around and they'd thresh, and they take it in, and they're taking it into where David wants it to be centered, out of a person's house. They're transporting it, and all of a sudden it's on rocky ground, and it starts tipping over. And Uzzah reaches out and touches it, and Uzzah gets zapped and dies immediately. Mm-hmm. Poor Uzzah. Was it a heart attack? Was God's Indiana Jones Ark of the Covenant electromagnetic force field causing an injury? Was it because anybody, but especially holy people, were not supposed to touch that which is holy? That rigid priestly classification of who's special, which we as Presbyterians completely deny.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, I don't know what happened to Uzzah. It's hard to tell what happened with these stories. Perhaps there was someone who might have had a heart attack. That'd be a really interesting way to, because you're trying to approach all of these things theologically. That's what these authors are doing anyway. Right. And especially if someone did touch the Ark of the Covenant and something did happen to them right then or maybe shortly after or something, like, of course you're going to attach theological significance to it. Mm-hmm. We still do it today. If something, if we're about to be in a car accident or something like that and you break just in the nick of time, how many times have you heard stories like, oh, God was there with me, or there were angels, or whatever it might be. We ascribe these theological ideas to just happenstance that happen in the world. And so perhaps some of that could be happening. But it also fits very well into their narrative. Mm-hmm. This is a holy ark. This is something that only the priests are supposed to be touching. And even today, if you go to the Dome of the Rock, there's a small space sitting out back where they say that the Ark of the Covenant used to sit. And if they give you a tour, you listen to what they're saying, they'll tell you, oh, holy stuff still happens here. This particular space, something is going on. Some people think it's haunted. Some people think it's whatever it might be. And perhaps the reality of the situation is more along the lines of, this has just been built up mythologically. This narrative has taken on a life that is so much larger than itself that this narrative can live on from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the idea of what all of Scripture is, isn't it? It's the team whichever it might be. The Steelers, the Eagles have their playbook that's been held on to. The old coach loved to use this. It was the thing that people have clung to for so long, and it's hard to fit different. When you cling to something that closely, it's hard to fit different understandings, different narratives into it. It's hard when that worldview is challenged, and it's hard when we're trying to learn more, we're trying to understand the world more, and it ends up becoming we try to work it all together, but our emotions go against it. We become angry. We don't want it to be this way. We don't want our world to be broken down.
Yeah, you would have had fun here when the Penn State scandal occurred and Joe Paterno's
I wasn't here.
reputation got a little sullied.
I was in Georgia at the time.
So we have, and people know, if they follow my perspective, there isn't anything holy except people. I completely reject the concept of the Holy Land. I think it's historically an interesting place. I've been there. I've been to the grotto, and my brothers almost caused a fist fight among the postcard sellers outside Jesus' birthplace. I don't think Jerusalem is any holier than Tegucigalpa, Honduras. I don't think anything in a church building is holy. My Roman Catholic friends and such, the communion, what we do with the communion bread after communion, if it's not eaten by the birds, let's throw it out.
Yeah.
As we like to say, Jesus isn't on the table, Jesus is at the table. We ourselves, that whole idea of the clerical superiority, no way. If anybody knows us, we are not superior.
Yeah.
There's nothing holy about us. Holy in this basically is a reflection of being chosen to be responsible. And the question is, how responsible are you? You've been set aside for something.
Yeah. Which is what holy means, to be set aside.
It's not superior. And so this whole concept of poor Uzzah, actually, and sort of coming down to it's interesting, this is where, let's get some facts. The word, when he touches it, because it's wobbly, the ark is wobbly on the ox cart, and the word could be it fell off and crushed him. Okay, which... Okay, well, that kind of changes the electromagnetic Indiana Jones zapping by a bully God.
Yeah.
Why would God be so upset that Uzzah tried to stop it from falling over? Theology trumps taking care of people? I don't think so. So I really do believe I lean towards the practical all the time because I'm Presbyterian. And low Presbyterian at that. Yeah. So the ox cart. Now the question is, why did it fall over? It was being taken on a shortcut across the threshing floor. It was on an ox cart. And to me, the real message is twofold. Number one, David wants the ark to be in a fixed place to consolidate his power. I'm not sure God would really approve of that. God did not want to be in a fixed, fenced-in area that David would have control over. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And David's story is a story of corruption. All the king's story is a story of corruption. The priest is a story of corruption. It was the prophets who were humble enough and humbled often enough to keep people honest. So they're taking it across the threshing floor. It falls. Why is it on an ox cart in the first place? Because the preferred way is it was supposed to be carried. And to me, the theological number 2 point, besides David trying to consolidate his kingdom and doing things all wrong and setting up the kingdom for failure and civil war and abuse and playing games with the Babylonians and everybody else, because they want to be like other nations. Well, you got it, friends. Sorry about that. Is that you're supposed to carry the presence of God yourself. That, to me, is the point.
Yeah.
Not with an ox cart. You can't relieve the burden.
Well, thanks, everyone. Have a good week.